In 2002, my dad took me to see Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. I was 11, and I was into Animorphs, skateboarding, decidedly not into nerdy fantasy stuff like Lord of the Rings, but, Fellowship was cool, and I thought there was no way that The Two Towers was going to top that one. But I was wrong. Two Towers was the coolest movie that I had ever seen. And when I would obtain my own DVD copy, I would pop that right into the DVD tray and scene skip right to the Battle of Helm's Deep. Scene skip now to 2015, when I started playing D&D again, and I would wonder how to capture the magic of Helm's Deep in my D&D game. Hi, I'm Pat, and this is my other cat. I make videos that give practical TTRPG advice about how to simplify your game and gamify the simple within your game. This is going to be another one of those gamifying the simple videos. As you can see, I'm in a new space. I'm experimenting with lighting and all that good junk that comes along with being an amateur, fledgling content creator. Please bear with me, as more changes will probably be coming in the future. Anyway, if making TTRPG videos that give practical advice sounds good to you, then give me a like and subscribe. Okay, on to the video. So, in order to capture that magic of Helm's Deep, I made a system for mass combat. I made it for 5th edition, but it could easily work for OSR games or other games where an abstract framework for large battles isn't already in place. But before I go into the system, it's important to talk about why I felt like I needed to make this system. 5e Dungeons & Dragons doesn't have a system for mass combat. Wizards of the Coast, or the company who makes Dungeons & Dragons, rolled out a playtest to handle mass combat, but it was never implemented. They also released a board game, and in my opinion, both of these efforts were not quite successful. Earlier editions of D&D do have rules for mass combat, and Matt Colville's company, MCDM, has released a system contained within the book Kingdoms and Warfare, linked down in the description. I think that one of these systems that I just mentioned might be good if you were trying to run a game that featured mass combat heavily throughout the campaign. But the games that I run, all those systems are just a little too crunchy for me and can be slow to resolve. And my players generally don't enjoy learning a new system if they aren't going to be using it for a long period of time. That's why I felt like I needed to make this system. When I made it, I thought it was important to adhere to some design goals. Number one, I wanted to be focused on the player characters. We would keep our narration focused mostly on these same characters that we focus on for all the rest of D&D. I want it to be simple. I want it to be easily learnable in one session, no need to pre-read any large document, and the rules wouldn't get in the way of the narration. As you can probably guess from the title, the third goal I had was for it to be cinematic. That means it would rely on narration. The battle would have these high and low points going through it, but tension would always be maintained through everything. Here's the system. And if you don't pay attention to anything else in the video, this is mostly just all that you need to pay attention to. This is it. So each round of the battle, we do this procedure. Number one, each player character assigns themselves to an objective or they short rest. Number two, we assign the support characters to a player character. Number three, we play out missions with objectives. Number four, we do the battle roll. The battle roll is how we simulate combat. If one army has 2 victory points, they win the battle. Let's break each of these down, starting with the most important, victory points. Victory points is a term that will be familiar to a lot of people who have experience playing board games. It's how you win. The first side to reach 2 victory points is the winner. Victory points represent an army winning on the battlefield. A victory point, or VP, could be narrated as capturing tactical ground, capturing valuable battlefield terrain, capturing hostages. It could be narrated as defeating large numbers of the opposition. And I chose 2 victory points because even 2 combats can be a lot in just one night. 2 also fits with best 2 out of 3, a gold standard since we were smart enough to start playing games with rock, paper, scissors. And most important, narratively, you can think of a victory point being one army retreating back to their home base, the inner walls of Gondor, the resulting combat, or combats, being where all hope is lost. It's ripe for drama. If you want to make it best 3 out of 5 or best 4 out of 7, go ahead and knock your socks off, but just for me and my playstyle, I recommend 2. Once per round, roll the battle roll. The battle roll is XD6, where X is how advantaged or disadvantaged the army is that the PCs have sided with. 2D6 take the lower if their army is at a disadvantage, just a straight up 1D6 if it's a relatively even fight, and 2D6 take the higher if the PC's army is at a significant advantage. If the highest die is a 1 to a 3, the army they are supporting does not get a victory point. Instead, that victory point goes to the opposing side. If it's a 4 or 5, they do get a victory point, but they suffer a consequence. More on consequences later. And finally, if it's a 6, they succeed. They get a victory point. Victory points are important because it's how the army wins, how the battle is decided. But it's fast and abstract, and you don't need to keep track of any individual units or anything that's kind of cumbersome. So victory points are kind of the large-scale conflict that's going on. But we like to focus on the player characters. So let's talk about missions. In the Battle of Helm's Deep, do we care about elf number 4? Only enough to give the battle a sense of scale. What we mostly care about is Legolas and Gimli, Aragorn and King Theoden, because they're the main characters. So how do we keep the battle focused on our main characters, but retain some sense of that scale? Missions. Missions are smaller scale encounters, occurring with the larger scale of the mass combat as its backdrop. Key encounters that might be turned into a mission could be something like stop the battering ram before it breaks down the gate, or eliminate the machine gunner in the pillbox, or capture the high ground, or get the message to the general. Missions are generally high-stakes objectives to be won or lost during the battle, and likely require heroic specialists in order to complete them. Your PCs are perfect for this job. Missions should be played out like regular encounters, referring only to the larger battle as part of the scenery or backdrop, the same way we would narrate the weather, the soundscape, or any other set dressing during that encounter. Success or failure of a mission could potentially turn the tide of the battle, and we want to make those stakes felt through mechanics. If players lose a mission, such as being forced to abandon the objective, getting captured, or killed, or if they achieve success with consequences, here are some consequences you could use. The player characters take some damage, the player character's army has disadvantage on the next battle roll, a support is permanently injured, or a permanent -1 die on battle rolls in the future. However, if the PCs are successful, they should be rewarded for their efforts, and those rewards should directly translate into the outcome of the battle. Some rewards could be advantage on the next battle roll, a new support gets added to their side, or a permanent extra die for subsequent battle rolls. Bonus tip here, if you want to make the battle feel more chaotic, you could give 2 objectives each battle round, but each player character can only pick 1. That causes the party to split up and take on different missions, but each group, each subset of the party will be weaker for having done so. Lastly, I want to point out that not every encounter has to be a combat. They could easily be skill challenges, social negotiations, or even a combination of the above. Fly the army's banner over a key location, which you could play out as a combat or a skill challenge, or both. Another encounter could be to convince an opposing mercenary group to betray the opposite side and come over to the PC side. And that could be played out like a social encounter. Do not feel limited or constrained in what kinds of missions you can throw at your player characters. Vary them up to help with the pacing of the session, because too many combats in a row can really feel like a slog. Instead, we want our combats to feel cinematic, and missions are what help us get there. Missions are how we gamify mass combat, while keeping it centered around our main characters. Even though the PCs are our main characters, we need supporting cast members. Aragorn needs this elf guy. I don't know his name, but supports are NPCs that play an active role during the battle. I already mentioned this elf guy, but here are some other examples of supporting characters. This guy in Gladiator, or this guy in Star Wars. Supports help us maintain this sense of scale. Otherwise, the player characters might get it in their heads that they're the only one pulling their weight around here. They also give the DM somebody to kill, so it can feel really narratively important without having to kill any of the player characters. This might not be an issue for you in your game, but I do not like killing player characters. It is an issue for me. A support can take 3 hits before they die.
In the arms of the angel.
What do supports do in our system? Player characters assign each support to one of their characters. When a support is assigned to a PC, that PC will do extra damage during every combat round in which they hit with an attack or do damage with a spell. I would do anywhere between a D6 and a D12 for damage, depending on what kind of weapons the support has on them and how narratively strong you have set them up to be. In this way, they are very much like MCDM's retainers from their book Strongholds and Followers. Anyway, what kind of characters should be a support? The answer is just badass people in the army. Generally, commanders shouldn't be supports, unless you're really going for that warrior king kind of vibe for that character. Instead, you want to make commanders to be part of a mission in the narrative of the battle. You could rescue them, you could bring them a message, get them to a certain position, etc. Supports aren't as important as missions or victory points. You could probably cut them, and the game would probably run faster. But I don't know. I haven't tried. Why don't you try it out and let me know in the comments what it did for you. That said, if you want the battle to feel tense and have like a cinematic sense of scale, then try out supports in your game. Putting it all together. Number 1, each player chooses an objective for the battle round or decides to short rest. Players cannot short rest between battles without using this mechanic. There is too much going on. This makes resources scarce and each mission more deadly and dramatic than the last. If a PC chooses to short rest, I'd probably let that player take over one of the support characters so they're not just kind of sitting out for a whole round of battle. Next, you assign supports to player characters. Players may choose to leave a support behind. If a support is left behind this way, remove one of their hits. Lastly, the other tip that I have for running supports is tell the player who that support is assigned to how much extra damage they're going to do. Watch their eyes light up. Third, play out those missions. As I said before, run it like any other encounter, except just include a lot of the battle going on in the background as set dressing or narrative description as you go through the encounter. Do the battle roll and assign victory points. If one side has enough victory points to win, that's it. The battle is over and that side has won. Throughout this procedure, give the players some space to roleplay. Ask them for short scenes where you think it'd be appropriate or dramatic. And remember, Helm's Deep wouldn't be as epic or fun if not for Legolas and Gimli's kill count conversation or King Theoden's epic speech. And that's it. That's the video. I set out to make a system that was centered around the PCs, simple to run, and cinematic. I think the system we have here meets that because we abstract mass combat to a single role, the battle role. But the PCs can influence that role by participating in the mission. And it creates cinematic scenes with consequences and rewards that creates high and low points for battle and maintains a consistent tension leading up to that battle role. But that's enough for me. What do you think? Does the system meet the expectations? Try it out. Let me know. Until next Thursday, roll those dice like they owe you some money.